All right, so this is chapter 1, What is Stress? And before we dive into the chapter, I wanted to start off with this quote. I cannot and should not be cured of my stress, but merely taught to enjoy it. And these are the words of Han Selye, and we are going to talk about Han Selye. He's actually one of the stress pioneers. And some of you might be wondering, why should I be enjoying my stress? I don't want to enjoy my stress. I'm taking this course to get rid of my stress. But I promise you, stress, as an amount of stress in your life, is important, and we'll talk about why in a bit. So we're going to come back to this. So this is chapter 1, What is Stress? One more thing before we get started. So on your paper or on your device where you're taking notes, I want you to write down your definition of what you think stress is. What does stress mean to you? Go ahead and take a moment. Stop the recording if you need to write that down, and we're going to come back to this. Okay, so let's dive in. Let's talk about the stress pioneers. So this gentleman on the screen, his name is Walter Cannon, and he is responsible for the fight or flight response. So Walter Cannon was the first person to describe the effects of acute stress. And he called this, again, the fight or flight response. And this is the body's initial reaction to stress. Some of you may experience an increase in heart rate, an increase in your breathing rate, an increase in muscular strength. You might notice that your mouth gets really dry. You'll experience, decreased saliva production. This is the fight or flight response. And your body is preparing itself to literally fight or flee from the stressor. So first and foremost, this response is a survival instinct. And it is meant for physical stressors, such as, well, heaven forbid, running from a burning building, running from a large animal. However, humans are becoming stressed out over these non-physical things. So stressors can be non-physical, stressors can be real or imagined. So that means that these stressors can be mental, emotional, or spiritual. And the stress response is going to occur regardless of whether the stress is real or if it's, perceived, if it's, something that you might be, let's say you hear strange sounds at night coming from outside your window, and those sounds are starting to, stress you out. You are perceiving those sounds as stressful because you think, oh no, is there an intruder at my window? Or, is there, just something bad coming my way? And this response is going to occur in proportion to the perceived danger. So if you are perceiving a unsurmountable amount of danger coming your way, then your fight or flight response is going to mirror that. Okay, let's go through some examples here. So let's talk about a real threat. So this is a real physical threat. So again, example of the caveman, large animal chasing after him. He is definitely going to experience the fight or flight response in order for his body to create that energy, in order for his body to supply his heart, his working skeletal muscles with that energy in order to run and get away. All right, have any of you ever been in a situation where you've been driving along and then all of a sudden, for no reason, the car in front of you just brakes super, super hard, and you also have to brake very, very hard, and you almost swerve out of the way, and thankfully you're okay, but this situation could have ended up being deadly. And this is definitely a real physical threat, which will respond in the fight or flight response. All right, let's talk about some not real threats. All right, so we have a picture of Timmy here. So imagine this with me for a moment. So let's say your older sister, well, first it's spring break, and your older sister comes to you and says, hey, I have an unexpected work trip and I need you to watch Timmy over spring break. And Timmy is a little heathen. And the thought of you watching Timmy for your entire spring break stresses you out. So watching Timmy isn't a real threat, but he can't hurt you, nothing bad is going to happen to you, but you still experience this fight or flight response. You're still going to feel stressed out. Have any of you ever seen this movie? So this is The Ring. For some, scary movies are their thing and they would not perceive this to be stressful. But for some of us, The Ring, watching this movie, this is a very scary and potentially very stressful thing to watch. Or, for some people, even just seeing the image, just kind of freaks them out. But this movie isn't going to hurt you watching this movie unless you're a character in the movie, of course. But you watching this film, this is not a real threat to your life, but it will still elicit a stress response for those of us that perceive this to be stressful, of course. All right, let's say you've gone to a haunted house with friends and you particularly don't enjoy haunted houses. You always feel a little scared when you're inside. But being in this haunted house, again, it's not a real threat. These are people in costumes that are jumping out at you. They are not going to physically hurt you or harm you in any way. So it's not a physical threat, but yet some of us, again, perceive this to be stressful. Okay, moving on to this gentleman. This is Hans Selye, and he is the person whose words were on that first slide of this lecture. And what Hans Selye is responsible for, he is responsible for the general adaptation syndrome, but we'll get there in a moment. He was a student of Walter Cannon. And remember, Walter Cannon studied the effects of acute stress, and Hans Selye studied the effects of long-term or chronic stress. And he came up with the general adaptation syndrome. So the general adaptation syndrome has 3 phases or stages: the alarm phase, the resistance phase, and the exhaustion phase. So the alarm phase, I really love the example that they give in the book. So I'm going to discuss it again. So let's say you're an individual that has social anxiety and you decide to go to a party. So during that alarm phase, you get to the party and immediately you feel your heart rate increase, your palms start to get sweaty, your mouth starts to get really dry. This is similar to the fight or flight response. And then moving on to the resistance phase, you're at the party for a little while, you notice that people are starting to come up to you to make conversation with you, and you will experience an increased stress response. So what happened during the alarm phase is just going to become heightened. So you are going to experience, your heart rate is going to continue to increase, you're starting to get sweatier, maybe your muscles are starting to get pretty tense. And then moving to the exhaustion phase, if you continue to expose yourself to this situation, you continue to go to parties often, and you don't manage your stress in the situation, if you continue to, again, expose yourself to the situation, it can result in illness and disease, such as coronary heart disease, because being exposed to this resistance phase for an extended period of time is not healthy. It can lead to heart problems, it can lead to blood vessel problems, and we'll talk about illness and disease in more detail in chapter 3. And we're going to keep talking about general adaptation syndrome for the next few chapters or so. And then it's also going to make a comeback when we talk about exercise, because it's really interesting. Certified strength and conditioning coaches will actually use the science behind the general adaptation syndrome with their athletes. So I think it's super interesting, and we'll talk about that later on in the semester. Okay, moving on. Talking about hassles and daily uplifts. So daily hassles. So these are smaller, inconveniences, smaller stressful events that occur often. These things are routine. So for example, they could be things like sitting in traffic every single day. On your way to work, you sit in traffic. On your way home, you sit in traffic. Or maybe you have roommates that don't wash their dishes, and every single day it's that daily hassle. You wake up, you go to the kitchen to make breakfast, and all of the dirty dishes are still in the sink, and then there's no clean bowl so you can have your cereal. So these little things that kind of nitpick at you on a routine basis are actually more detrimental to your health than if a major stressful event were to occur. And then we have daily uplifts. So daily uplifts, these can actually counteract the negative effects of some of the hassles that we experience on a routine basis. So daily uplifts are little positive things that happen to you. Maybe you got your hair cut and somebody gives you a nice compliment, or they can also come in the form of a habit, something that you do for yourself every single day. So my daily uplift is performing at least 30 minutes of cardio in the morning. And I've tried to make that my routine, because whenever I do that, after I finish my 30 minutes of cardio, I personally feel super good, and I'm in a good mood for the rest of the day. But it doesn't have to be cardio. Maybe you grab a cup of coffee and you have 10 to 15 minutes of quiet time, just to kind of clear your head before your busy day begins. And it can also be other nice things that people do for you. Maybe someone paid for an extra 15 minutes of parking in the parking meter for you because they noticed that the time was going to expire. Little things like that, anything that makes you feel good, can counteract the negative effects of some of those daily hassles. All right, moving on to the stress building blocks. Okay, so we have the good, the bad, and the meh. So eustress, this is the good type of stress. Yes, so we do have good, bad, and neutral types of stress. So again, eustress, that is the good type of stress. So this would be something like, maybe you get a promotion at work, or maybe you're getting married, or maybe you're having a baby that was planned. All of these things are very happy life events, but there is some stress that is attached to, you got that promotion at work, you're going to make more money, but maybe you have more responsibilities. So there's a little bit more stress involved there. Or maybe you're getting married, and you have to plan this wedding. There's so many things that go into wedding planning. So the end result will be positive, but again, there's some stress that is attached. But nevertheless, this is good stress. And then we have distress. This is the bad type of stress. This is the type that we are most familiar with as stress. So distress can be both acute, it can have a high intensity and a short duration, or it can be chronic. So that means it has a low intensity and it's prolonged. And then we have something called eustress. Eustress is neutral stress. So an example of eustress would be, maybe we heard that on the news that an earthquake just occurred in a remote corner of the globe. And, it's on an uninhabited small island, nobody lives there, and you're like, oh, okay, like, wow, that's something that's pretty stressful, but it has no direct effect on my life. Moving on to stress theory. So there are a few different theories that explain the causes of stress. So the first theory, the life events theory, stress occurs because the situation requires more resources than we have available. So for example, I would never do this, but let's say I announce a pop quiz or a pop exam, and you didn't have enough time to study. You were not prepared. So you don't have enough resources available in order to be well prepared to take that exam, and therefore stress will occur. And then we have the hardiness theory. The hardiness theory is your perception, and perception is really everything. So your attitude toward the event will determine whether or not you have a stress response. So if you view your stressors as a challenge, you have a hardy personality and you will not have a stress response. But if you view that stressor as a threat, then the stress response will occur. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into chapter 8, when we talk about personality and perception. Moving on to the social support theory. So stressors occur when we don't have enough social capital to meet the need of that stressful situation. And social support is something that is incredibly important when it comes to stress management. Having social support is, one of the biggest components. So if you don't have anybody to lean on when you're experiencing a significant amount of stress in your life, it's going to be very difficult for you, and therefore you will experience a stress response or significantly more stress than someone that doesn't have social support in their life. All right, moving on to the stressor. So the stressor is a stimulus with the potential, note potential in red and underlined. We'll talk about potential in a bit. So it's a stimulus with the potential to cause a stress reaction. And stressors can be biological, psychological, sociological, or even philosophical. So examples of biological stressors could be something like a solar flare, deforestation, an earthquake, a hurricane, the spread of COVID. Psychological stressors could be, maybe you have a low self-esteem, maybe you're concerned about your ego. Sociological, maybe there's an urban sprawl that's occurring, traffic, politics. And then a philosophical stressor could be something such as an existential conflict. What is the meaning of life? What is the reason for being, kind of thing. Okay, let's talk about potential. So stressors themselves do not, I repeat, do not cause a stress reaction. Consider this, the DMV. So I'm sure most of you would consider going to the DMV to be stressful, right? But the DMV, again, not a physical threat, and it's not going to physically cause any harm to you. So imagine this with me for a moment. So let's say you get to the DMV, you're waiting in line, an adult behind you is holding a small child. That small child starts crying, and then you have two people in front of you that start arguing. Eventually, you grab your number, you sit down, and then the gentleman that is sitting next to you takes off his shoes, and the aroma from his shoes and his feet are wafting in your direction. Sounds very stressful, right? Right. But do any of these things actually really elicit any type of response from us by themselves? And the answer is no. Ultimately, your stress reaction is dependent on your interpretation of the stressor. So if you interpret this experience to be stressful, if you interpret it to be a threat, then you will experience a stress response. Moving on to stress reactivity. So stress reactivity is the physiological reaction to stress. And then the effect of stress equals the duration and the degree. And the duration is far more important than the degree. So remember, so stress reactivity is commonly known as the fight or flight response. And it was termed by who? Walter Cannon. Yes, that is the correct answer. So again, this is our bodily reaction to the stressor. And that increased heart rate, that increased muscle tension. And again, really important here, if we have a low degree of chronic stress, that is going to be more detrimental to our health than if we were to experience a single major stressful life event. And we'll talk about that more later. Moving on to strain. So strains are the outcomes of reactivity, and there are 3 different types of strain. We have physical, psychological, and behavioral strain. So physical strain, experiencing that physiological response for an extended period of time, weeks, months on end, can result in physical issues, so things like tension headaches. Psychologically, an example would be agoraphobia, and agoraphobia is an anxiety disorder characterized by symptoms of anxiety in situations where the person perceives their environment to be unsafe with no easy way to escape. And for some individuals, these situations can include being in an open space or being in public transit, a shopping center, or simply just being outside of their home. And then finally, we have behavioral strain, and that is can be something such as alcohol abuse, drug abuse, even food abuse. Okay, so just a few differences between genders and reactivity. So females, so when females experience stress, they usually tend to do something called tend and befriend. So they are more likely to reach out for social support. They are more likely to utilize those social groups and talk about their stressors as a form of stress management. While males, on the other hand, tend to utilize more of that fight or flight response, and they are less likely to use social groups. But hopefully this is changing, because usually there's a big stigma with gender. Men are supposed to hold on to their stress and hold on to their issues and not talk about it. And now that's considered to be something called toxic masculinity. We want males to be able to express their feelings and to be able to express their stress in a healthy manner. So we don't want to bottle that stress up. That is what is going to make us sick. And yeah, we don't want that at all. Have you noticed that I haven't given you a definition for stress yet? So here it is, get ready. And yes, you will need to know this for the exam. Okay, the definition of stress is the combination of a stressor, stress reactivity, and strain. So put more simply, the stimulus, stressor, will lead to a response, which is reactivity and strain. So that reactivity, again, is that initial fight or flight response. And then that strain is a result of that extended, that chronic duration of experiencing this reactivity. Okay. So we are going to discuss different types of stressors. We are also going to discuss in this course the response. We're going to talk about the physiology of stress in chapter 2, and we're also going to talk about illness and strain that can occur in chapter 3, but we are also going to talk about the arrow. And the arrow, all of the things that can either heighten or lessen, the response. And again, we're going to cover all 3 of these sections. All right, now I want you to compare your definition to the textbook's definition. Was it close? Did you have one component, maybe 2? All right, moving on, let's talk about health, wellness, and stress. So health consists of 7 dimensions: the physical, social, mental, emotional, spiritual, environmental, and occupational. And wellness is the degree to which of these components of health are in balance. And there's a common misconception that in order to be a healthy person, that you are physically free and clear of any illness or disease, but that is completely not true. We need to make sure that we pay attention to all of the dimensions in order to be a healthy, rounded person. Okay, so let's go through these 7 dimensions. So the first is physical health. So physical health, can you function on a daily basis? Can you perform your activities of daily living? And activities of daily living are things like, washing the dishes and doing your laundry, going grocery shopping. For students, activities of daily living will hopefully also include, doing your homework and your schoolwork. And then, of course, the absence of disease, and then your level of physical fitness. Moving on to social health. So your social health, can you, create meaningful relationships with others? Can you maintain these relationships with others? Because again, social health, social support, so important for stress management. Moving on to mental health. So this is your ability to learn and grow intellectually, your capacity to question things, to be curious about the world around you. Your emotional health, your ability to control your emotions, your ability to express your emotions. And then your spiritual health, these are your beliefs and values. Do you have, faith, or do you have, and faith doesn't necessarily have to mean that you have a specific religion that you follow. For some people, spirituality means just having a connection to other people. And we'll talk about spirituality later on in the semester. Environmental health. So do we have a healthy, supportive, functioning setting? Well, right now I know the quality of the air is rather poor due to all of the fires, but this also includes, the quality of the air that you breathe, the purity of the water that you drink, the amount of noise to which you are subjected. If you are living in a location where there's a lot of construction right now, that can definitely affect your ability to function on a daily basis, and that can definitely affect your overall health. And then your occupational health, do you have a satisfying job? Are you doing are you doing work that is meaningful to you? Do you have satisfying relationships with your boss and your coworkers? Do you earn enough money in order to, to support yourself? And I know if some of you live in the Bay Area, it's very, very expensive to live here. But we'll talk about finances again later on. We're going to talk about a whole bunch of stuff in this class, just, if you haven't gotten that already. Okay, so this is not in your textbook, but this is something that I'm pulling from another class that I teach. This is the Lokahi wheel, and Lokahi means balance, unity, and harmony in Hawaiian. And this is the belief that, all of these domains of health are connected. So if let's say your Work and school piece of this wheel is starting to suffer. Maybe you start to get really busy at work or at school. You have less time for friends and family. You start to neglect your physical body. Maybe you don't have enough time to exercise. So all of these things are going to start to suffer. So everything is connected, just like with the 7 dimensions of health that I just talked about. All of these dimensions are interconnected, and wellness and your health is something that is going to change over the course of your entire life. So your definition of wellness right now as a college student might be different of what what it will be in 5 to 10 years once you're finished with college. So again, this is continuously growing, changing, with whatever, with all of the events that occur in your life. Moving on to the relationship between stress and illness, because some of you might have noticed in your life, if you get stressed out, your health might start to suffer. And there's definitely a relationship between the amount of stress that you experience and your health. So on this side of our graph here, we have illness. And then down here we have stress. And you notice this U-shaped curve. So if we experience less stress, so a little amount of stress, we are going to experience illness, because there is a certain amount of stress, a certain amount of arousal. And when I say the word arousal, I don't mean sexual arousal, but arousal in terms of what am I trying to say here? Certain amount of arousal in order to just function on a daily basis. And then on this side, if we have a lot of arousal or a lot of stress, that's going to lead to more illness. So we actually need a specific amount of stress in our life in order to function optimally. So remember the words of Hans Selye from the beginning of the slide set: I cannot and should not be cured of my stress, but merely taught to enjoy it. We need a specific amount of stress in order to function optimally. It's bad for us to completely get rid of all of our stress, and it's also bad for us to have too much stress in our life. So we need an optimal amount of stress to flourish. So the goals for stress management are: do not attempt to eliminate all of your stress, with the example that I gave you on the previous slide. We want to work to limit the harmful effects of stress. So we want to make sure that we manage our stress, whether it's through time management, whether it's practicing relaxation techniques, adding in a daily uplift in order to manage our stress, but making sure that we're working hard to limit the harmful effects of our stress so we do not get sick. We want to use stress as a motivator for peak performance. For all of my athletes out there, if you ever get a little nervous before a big meet or before a big race or a big competition, you notice that your palms get sweaty, your heart rate increases. That's your body telling you, okay, I'm ready to go. And I want you to harness that physiology, harness those feelings in order to do your best during that athletic performance. And it doesn't always have to be with athletic performance. For some of us that are, performers on stage, maybe you're an actor or a singer, use it, harness that as well. Use this as a motivator. And stress is definitely useful. It's very stimulating and it's welcome. So remember, again, I'm bringing up the words of Hans Selye: I cannot and should not be cured of my stress, but merely taught to enjoy it. Because throughout your entire life, you're always going to have some form of stress. And that's the way it's going to be. So again, we want to limit the harmful effects of the stress in our life. We want to be able to use it as a motivator, and we should not eliminate all of that stress. So another quote for you: I'm an old man now, And I've known a great many problems in my life, most of which never happened. And these are the words of Mark Twain. And another thing that I want to mention is that most of us are stressing out about things that are never ever going to happen. I want you to think back really quickly to things that you've stressed out about, maybe even in the last couple of weeks. Did they happen? Were they, things that actually occurred? Chances are most of these things, most of these scenarios, we're just kind of imagining in our head and we're stressing ourselves out. So I just want you to hold on to this quote and keep it with you. Okay. So I want to note that this stress model is not in your textbook, but I would like you to remember this stress model. This is the original stress model. And we actually don't go over the stress model until chapter 5, but I want to start talking about it now. And again, when I ask you questions about the stress model on the exam, I will be referring to this one. Okay, so steps of the stress model. Life situation, perception, cognitive appraisal, emotional arousal, mind-body link, physiological arousal, physical effects, and illness and disease. So let me walk you through all of these. So let's say a life situation occurs. Maybe, gosh, let me think of a good example. Let's say your textbook got lost in the mail. I don't know. Your textbook got lost in the mail, and it was a $300 textbook, and you called the company, you called the shipping company, nobody knows where it's at. So you perceive this situation to be stressful because the instructor told you that you're going to need this textbook on the first day of class and you're not going to have it. So you perceive the situation to be stressful. And at this point, for your perception, if you perceive it to be stressful, then you will continue going down the list of this stress model. However, if you realize, or if you told yourself, it's not a big deal, my best friend told me that they would share their textbook with me, then it stops there. You no longer perceive the situation to be stressful, and then no stress response will occur. But let's take the former, not the latter. So your friend, they can't lend you the textbook, and you perceive this to be stressful. So for your cognitive appraisal, you realize, okay, there's nothing that I can do. I've, called everybody that I could. I'm not getting this textbook in time. You start to get worried, maybe a little scared. That is emotional arousal. Since your mind and your body are linked together, you will start to experience physiological arousal. So you will start to experience that physiological stress response, that fight or flight response. Your heart rate's going to increase. You're going to start to get sweaty. Maybe you'll start to breathe a little faster. If you experience this for an extended period of time, you will experience more serious physical effects. And if you experience those physical effects for an extended period of time, it's going to lead to illness or disease. So when it comes to the stress model, we want to do everything that we can to avoid getting down here. We want to limit the harmful effects of stress. So as you go through this course, I ask that you pay attention to the moments when you start to feel stressed out. I want you to pay attention to your emotional arousal. I want you to pay attention to your symptoms, your physiological symptoms that you feel when you get stressed out. And then and this will happen, sometimes we'll get sick due to stress, and you know what, sometimes there isn't anything that we can do about it, but especially, when we get a cold, usually around midterm or final exam time, but I'm talking about more serious forms of disease, in particular cardiovascular disease. We don't want to acquire cardiovascular disease from our stress. But anyways, I digress. I want you to do everything that you can to stop this from going down the list. So let me give you an example. So we're going to take an intervention like meditation, and we're going to stick it right here. So let's say you start to feel a little worried, a little bit anxious. So you decide that you're going to participate in some meditation, some breathing exercises. You're going to sit quietly for 10 to 15 minutes, and that is going to alleviate some of your stress. And granted, it's not going to take away the problem completely. Ideally, we would like to, if possible, get rid of the issue or the problem, solve the problem, rather than running to relaxation techniques first. But, for this example, this is the only thing that we can do. And we're going to stick meditation right here, and we're going to try to stop it from going down the rest of this list. Okay. And we can stick a whole slew of different interventions in here. Maybe we end up finding the book from a different seller, we order that, and ordering that book, right here after we start to feel worried, we order that new book, and it's shipped, and it should be here in a couple of days. Let's say it's from Amazon, and that stress response will stop there as well. Or maybe you use exercise after the physiological arousal stage. That would be fine too. And we're going to talk about interventions and the stress model again in chapter 5, but I just want you to get familiar with the stress model now. All right, so since I mentioned relaxation techniques, I think this is really, really important to have a positive and receptive attitude when you are participating in these relaxation techniques. I hear often from a lot of students, they're like, it doesn't work for me. I tried it and it doesn't work well, or I know it's not going to work for me even before you go in and try it. Well, yeah, sure. If you come in with that attitude regarding any activity, it's not going to work. You're not going to have a good time. So all that I ask is that you are receptive and you come in with a positive attitude, because there are more than a handful of relaxation techniques that you're going to perform over the course of the semester. And stress management is experiential. So you have to practice these techniques, whether it's practicing your time management skills, practicing relaxation techniques. You have to apply it in your own life. I talk to a lot of students that take stress management at other universities or at other colleges, and they're like, yeah, I took a stress management class, but it didn't really work. And I'm like, okay, well, do you actively practice those things that were discussed in class? No. Okay, well, then it's not going to work. So all of these things, I'm giving you all of the tools, and I can talk to you until I'm blue in the face about how great it is to do all of these things. But if you don't do it, then it's not going to help. It's not going to work for you. So to know and not to do is not to know. So you really have to actively participate and apply these things to your life in order to manage your stress. And again, you can only get out what you put into it. So if you're putting in shoddy work, then you're going to get, a shoddy effort. So if you're really trying to make these changes, I encourage you to try the best that you can. I want you to take the time and be honest with yourself. And then also, not all relaxation techniques are going to work for everyone. So I want you to find the ones that work for you. For some people, meditation, fantastic. Others, not so much. And also, it might take more than a couple of tries, more than a handful of tries actually, in order for these relaxation techniques to start to work. So I encourage you, outside of these lab assignments, maybe give it a few more tries to see if you actually like it and see if it actually works for you. And here are a whole slew of relaxation techniques. We're going to be doing meditation, progressive muscular relaxation, diaphragmatic breathing. We're going to do yoga, art, And then I'm also going to talk about all of these in a later chapter. Okay, so for your first lab, you're going to perform diaphragmatic breathing, and I have examples listed in that lab activity week 1 module on Canvas. But really quickly, I just wanted to talk about diaphragmatic breathing. So this is diaphragmatic breathing. So when you inhale, your belly is going to come out. And then when you exhale, your belly is going to come in and your chest actually isn't going to move. So when you practice diaphragmatic breathing, I want you to put one hand on your chest and another hand right below your rib cage, or you can even put it on your belly button if you prefer. And the hand that is on your chest when you inhale is going to stay completely still. And the hand that is on your belly, you're going to feel that move because your belly is going to expand and then your belly is going to retract. But again, the hand that is on your chest should not move. If your hand is moving on your chest, that means that you're performing chest breathing, and that is wrong. And we really want you to perform that belly breathing, that deep breathing, diaphragmatic breathing. Diaphragmatic breathing is excellent. You can perform this relaxation technique literally anywhere. And for a lot of these techniques, things like meditation, autogenic training, yoga, it all comes back to the breathing. And breathing is just so powerful and it can provide relief in just a few minutes. So we're going to do that this week. And that's the end of lecture 1. If you have any questions, please feel free to post in the Q&A form or send me a message.